Hello, July here again. This is part 2 of the video series about the impact that the release of the Grand Exchange had on the game and on the community. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, then please go do that right now, because in part 2 we will continue where we ended in part 1, and there will be several references to or a certain overlap with part 1 as well. I have added a link to it in the video description. So in part 1 we discussed the pre-Grand Exchange era and the relevant community related aspects. In part 2 we are going to have a closer look at how the release of the Grand Exchange affected skilling. Before the release of the Grand Exchange, which happened in November of 2007, everyone was supposed to obtain the resources for their skilling adventures, either by training the resource gathering skills, such as mining or woodcutting, or by purchasing resources in one-on-one trades with other people, which is also called face-to-face trading. If the player chose for the latter, he or she had several options. The player could check the forums and or post a thread with their trade offer. The player could go through the friends list to check if there was anyone who could help. Or as explained in part 1, the player could go to World 1 or World 2. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the landscape was radically different when it comes to skilling, and that because of one major difference. Not only did players have to spend time on training the skills, before the release of the Grand Exchange, they also had to spend a considerable amount of time on trying to obtain or buy the resources, and likewise for selling the produced items. And that is often forgotten when comparisons are made between how fast skilling is today and how fast it used to be before 2008, before the release of the Grand Exchange. The best way to demonstrate this is by using an example of a skilling method. Assume that Airrune runecrafting provides around 5k XP per hour today and 5k XP per hour back in 2007 before the release of the Grand Exchange. Today you can buy the rune essence in the Grand Exchange while doing other activities such as runecrafting. However, back in 2007, most people would have decided to check out the popular trading locations in World 1 and 2 to see if anyone was selling rune essence at a reasonable price. Now the question is, should we exclude the time that it takes to buy the essence just because it is not part of the actual runecrafting process? Of course not. I think we should look at the big picture here. Regardless of the XP rates being exactly the same in our example, Airrune runecrafting in 2007 was slower because the time spent on buying the rune essence should be taken into account as well. Time spent on preparation is, in my opinion, equally important as the time spent on the actual process of training the skill, and I'm sure that any efficient skiller would agree with that. So, given this new time-saving advantage created by the Grand Exchange, and of course also due to the removal of free trade and wilderness PvP not much later, skilling clans flourished in 2008, which was great if you were a skiller, but it did bring along a new mentality that had been visible only in the background prior to 2008, and that is the no XP waste mentality. The best example to demonstrate that RuneScape had by that moment evolved into the perfect game for skillers is by having a look at some XP gains. If we look at Zedzima for example, Zedzima was the first person to achieve 1 billion total XP, which happened in June of 2007, or 6 years after he had started playing RuneScape, and it was a truly big achievement at that time. Gert achieved 1 billion XP in October of 2008, which is when the Grand Exchange had been out for 11 months, and from that moment it took him only 18 months to reach 2 billion XP. The existence of the Grand Exchange had significantly facilitated the accessibility to the item production skills, also commonly referred to as the buyable skills today. That was visible not only in XP gains, but also in the ways in which the community looked at skilling. Prior to the release of the Grand Exchange, the majority of the community would probably have agreed that the prospect of having to buy all the necessary resources to reach level 99 in the item production skills was particularly daunting because of the amount of time-consuming face-to-face trading that it would involve. With the Grand Exchange, this feeling disappeared because the Grand Exchange allowed the community to buy all the necessary resources without having to spend much time and effort on the process, and the same story applies to selling the produced items. So the Grand Exchange was incredibly beneficial for the skilling world, as it made skilling a lot more convenient, and it therefore boosted the popularity of the skills that require a lot of buying and selling, including the fastest skills of the game, which were then of course the number one choice for the top ranked players, and these skills include crafting, smithing, prayer, etc. All of which gave at least 200k XP per hour, which was a lot at that time. I'm going to end part 2 here because we have said quite a bit now. In part 3, we are going to focus some more on skilling again, but with a stronger focus on high score competition, and we're also going to have a look at how the Grand Exchange affected merchanting and at the general reception of the update when the Grand Exchange was released. So that's something to look forward to. Whenever I upload part 3, I will make sure to add a link to it in the video description. If you haven't already, consider subscribing or following me on my social media pages so that you won't miss out on any new videos. Thank you for watching. I am July, and I hope that you will come back for more.